What's up, interpreters? My name is Emily Jacobs, and I am the Interpretive Program Manager for Washington State Parks.
What's up, interpreters? I'm Rob Barrett, Director of Interpretive Programming and Education for Tennessee State Parks.
What is up, interpreters? I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director for NAI.
What's up, interpreters? I am Song, your NAI Events Manager. Emily and Rob, what a pleasure to have two of my favorite people on. I say that all the time.
You do. We know you do.
But I'm serious. And I just saw you at National Conference, and man, it's good to see you in person. I love it. And now here we are doing this podcast. Well, I feel like an odd man. Well, I guess, Paul, we're both odd people out right now because we don't manage any parks.
It's true that we don't manage parks.
But how is it managing parks? I mean, that seems like a really big lift. Like, generally, Emily, like, what does that entail? What do you do all day?
Well, I'd like to make it sound more exotic than it is, but a colleague of mine says we have two kinds of people in our agency. People that engage with visitors all day and people that engage with their computer screen all day. And I am unfortunately one of the latter. So I spend a lot of my time sitting in front of a camera, as I am right now. And it could be a variety of, could be having conversations with field staff, trying to understand a little bit more about projects they're accomplishing, could be training interpreters online. There could be budget conversations, planning conversations, as we're doing master plans and thinking about how to integrate interpretation. And so, one of the things that I really love about my job is how every single week is different. And there is such diversity, which kind of reflects the system, right? We have 124 state parks in Washington State, and it's quite diverse. So there's just a lot of meetings, and then occasionally I have the pleasure of going out and facilitating programs, mentoring. I'm a unique person in my position in that I actually have the opportunity to wear the uniform, which normally does not come with this position. And so I've been actually facilitating, demonstrating programs. Hey, this is what an astronomy program might look like at your park, or helping at an event. But most of the time it's a lot of meetings. Right, Rob? Very glamorous. Sometimes I even get to meet with Rob, which is even better.
Yes, we get to hang out from time to time and exchange ideas. For me, I'm not actually directly in Parks chain of command. I'm sort of adjacent to the director of operations. So I say I get to help empower parks to achieve their goals. So I think the thing that's a little bit different for the way my team approaches it than maybe it's been approached historically is I ask them first what they want to achieve, starting with those objectives, and then looking at getting the tools lined up and giving those tools to them to make sure that they're able to meet their interpretive goals and generate that next generation of stewards. But everything that Emily said too.
Both of you obviously are super well versed in interpretation. I would be remiss if we didn't point out that Emily Jacobs was a member, my co-worker on NAI staff for a decade. From my perspective, when you're talking about managing state parks, when you're talking about the helping them achieve their goals, how do you use your in-depth knowledge of interpretation, and what role does interpretation play in helping parks achieve those goals?
So for me, it is vital to the mission of Tennessee State Parks to interpret these sites, because without an educated electorate and stakeholder group that is supporting parks and asking for parks, we won't be able to continue. So what's the point of doing something today of protecting these spaces if they aren't going to be protected tomorrow? So that is really what people are coming back to again and again. They're asking, how do we continue to inspire this continued support of parks? And we've been really lucky within my leadership to have them adopt the stewardship staircase, not only as central to interpretation, but also incorporated into our strategic plan for all parks as part of how we propagate and continue the work that we love and the spaces we cherish.
Yeah. Wow. I love that idea, Rob. I know that that's something that we're heading towards. There's a Like Rob, interpretation is in both our vision and our mission, or at least education is. And so I think as an agency, we really understand that this is kind of core to who we are and what we do. It's just always being able to have the resources to do it fully. Right. So I know Rob and I and other folks in my position have talked about the various models by which interpretation is being done. But in our system, we have 22 interpretive centers, and those are mostly, not even all, but many of them have a full-time interpretive specialist who is there helping to facilitate experiences with visitors, making sure the doors are open, the bathrooms are clean, which is not something I've ever done as an interpreter before, but it is very much involved, that guest experience, right? That visitor experience. But I think that as we have existed, the interpret program first started in the 1950s. My position was originally state park historian in 1954. And as it has grown, there continues to be this broader understanding of interpretation. How can we do it? It's not just when a ranger is standing in front of you at an amphitheater, like what's behind Rob, or it could be a podcast, it could be on our website, it could be in a brochure. We have a lot of the more traditional like wayside exhibits, but that's really one of the things that we're looking to do and to continue to build upon is how do we take these experiences? We saw the importance of our state park system. Really, visitors have shown us that quite, I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for, very tangibly, I guess, during COVID, when we just saw there wasn't space in our parking lots, right? People were asking for services, and we were just trying to, again, keep the bathrooms clean. So I think leveraging that, and I guess the last thing I will say is within the last couple of years, we have a relatively new director for state parks. She's been in the position for several years. She has specifically delineated interpretation as a huge part, a goal for what she wants to accomplish, as well as her supervisors, the commissioners, have also designated that interpretation as really important. So it's an exciting time to work for this agency as we try to figure out the answer to the question you just asked.
So it's nice to hear that, interpretation is important to both of your organizations. So you don't have to necessarily explain it and keep going, to bat for your department, for the program. But what are some of your biggest challenges in with interpretation at your parks?
So, it's interesting, Song. I think there are these challenges, and then there are these that are also opportunities, right? So one of the biggest reasons why I was interested in this position was because we have 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington state. And so since 2015, the department that I work with has been very meaningfully, it's literally in our guiding principles, which have been approved by the legislature and the commission, to say that we will always work with tribes to integrate their stories, to uplift their stories. And I think one of the biggest challenges with that is that we don't operate on the same timeline. So a lot of my funding comes from the legislature. We have to spend it within a particular amount of time, usually on a 2-year cycle. We may not have the relationships yet. And so we don't want to rush the relationships. We want to make sure, there's a long legacy of government not necessarily being kind with our tribal communities or tribal nations. We have every single treaty in Washington state has been broken. And so really making sure that we have time to go slow, that we can build those relationships, that we can be really flexible. And that's really a core of who we are, which I'm so honored to be part of that work. It just doesn't always line up with the funding cycle. And so that's one of the things that I'm, trying to do is to seek different funders. I joked, I live in Washington. Wouldn't it be great if I could call Bill Gates and say, hey, is there a way we can get some additional funding just to do tribal interpretation? And you may not see it be spent during your lifetime. It may not get spent during my lifetime, but we could have that money in order to be able to spend the money when the relationships were there, or even as the story has evolved. So I think that is a huge challenge and an opportunity. And then I think there's also trying to figure out how to adequately staff this, and how do you balance, our organization went through a very large layoff in the mid 2010s. And it was just announced in November that now we are projected to be $12 billion in the hole over a 4-year cycle. And so, yes, I want to have an interpreter in every single management area or in every single park would be my ideal. But how do you manage that with failing infrastructure? We're the agency within the state that has the largest number of historic structures. And that's very exciting when you think about what we have to interpret, but it's also very challenging to maintain. Just as an example, there were a number of coast military forts that were put in during World War I and World War II, to guard the Puget Sound, to make sure the Columbia River was safe. Most of those got turned over to us in the 50s. And so hundreds of buildings that were never meant to still be around and standing and have people stay in them, right? In the 20th century, 21st century, I should say. So it's really all of those overlapping priorities. How do we make sure visitors are safe? How do we make sure bathrooms are clean? How do we make sure that our interpretive centers are open? And also, how can they be updated? So there's a lot of moving parts, I think. And I know I've been involved in conversations with our capital funding and, trying to vie for new exhibits at an interpretive center, and literally being in a conversation where we're talking about failing sewage systems or septic systems, right? So obviously that's going to win over interpretation. So I don't know if I want to do signs on sewage in the bathroom. I mean, maybe that's a way we can integrate it, but there's a way in which we're trying to find ways, and the agency and a lot of staff look for, I can't tell you how many projects we find out about that have been funded, and then some very enthusiastic staff member decided to put interpretation in it, but maybe we didn't know that at headquarters, because I have one exhibit coordinator, one for 900 outdoor signs and 22 interpretive centers. So I think that's a lot of it, is trying to, there's a lot of commitment, there's a lot of dedication, but it's how do you do the best that you can? How can you leverage the resources that you have when, what a surprise. Government is not flush with money. And it looks like over the next couple of years, we're going to have to be really making some difficult decisions.
Well, thanks, Emily. I think what I would like to add to that, you actually triggered a lot of thoughts in my head, is one problem I've noticed with our profession as a whole is we struggle to think in a business-minded sense. So that's really been my role, is to take what we do and make it generate data, and then turn that data into something that will inspire somebody who is business minded to continue to support our operations. So that's been really tricky, because a lot of times as interpreters, we're more about how people feel and what they get at the end of it. But I think we also need to recognize that if we're doing our job right, that generates a conservation return, it generates a management return, it generates a social return, and a health return. And if we begin to codify those, we'll really be able to speak to our leaders about why we're worthy of investment. The other thing is, I notice a lot of times when working with various people, they tend to think whole hog or no hog. They don't see the middle ground of what can we do today with what resources we have that'll push us to that final goal that you have in mind. And I think that all comes back to planning. So another thing that I've really focused on to indemnify us from political change, from new administration, from fads within the industry, is to really focus in on planning and make planning inclusive of multiple voices, to make it timeline restricted so that it doesn't go on forever, and then to also focus more on consistency of planning across sites rather than complexity of planning. I think complexity is something we can grow into, and that's that whole hog, no hog. I found the medium hog, I guess, or tofu if you're a vegan. Whole tofu, no tofu.
I thought that you were saying that tofu was the middle ground between whole hog and no
Whole
hog.
and half, right?
Yeah, actually, you're probably right.
Say, Rob, can I just ask you, when you're talking about planning, because I'm also really trying to integrate interpretive planning, but as a field-based operation, as opposed to in the past, again, due to lack of resources, we have hired outside consultants.
Mhm.
And they may have crafted wonderful, fabulous plans, but then the field, people leave, and the individuals who crafted that with them are no longer at the park. So when you're talking planning, are you talking strategic, interpretive, both? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we implemented some park business plans,
Mm.
which included a section on interpretation. Our goal was to get through 56 in 1 year. And I said, I can't actively facilitate that program. So what we did is we just had the park managers write down some interpretive stuff. Now we're circling back, doing 12 plans a year. And the way they work is I have 6 area interpretive rangers that's each support about 10 parks. They meet with a park stakeholder, generally the park interpretive contact, and they sit down and they meet for 2 hours doing all the discovery, the pre-work. Then they identify who they want at a scoping meeting. We invite the people to the scoping meeting, friends groups, members, volunteers, park staff, non-interpretive staff, and then also community members. And members of my team facilitate a 4 to 6 hour scoping meeting where we bring them through activities that help to develop the plan. We let the park sit with that for a couple weeks, and then we circle back with that area interpretive ranger and finalize the plan, and then that gets approved. How we're working that in now is we're doing that the year ahead of their business plan being renewed so that it folds into and really helps to direct that business plan. So, really just thinking about making it achievable, getting 5 strong goals that we'll be able to report on written down within the plan, and then building from there as an agency. As far as the legacy, I think that's about changing the organizational culture from this is my park and I need to make a thumbprint on it to
Mhm.
this is the park that I am helping to come to fruition and I am part of this plan and my voice will be folded into it when my turn comes.
Thematically, obviously, the reason that we asked both of you to be on this is because of your roles within a state park system. The difference between Washington as a state and Tennessee as a state is fairly significant in some ways anyway. Geography, location, politics. I mean, it's all quite different. Where are the areas where you two could sit down and share concerns? What are the similarities in your challenges and opportunities, and then what's just something that is completely unique to Tennessee or completely unique to Washington where you all just would not relate to one another at all in terms of your day on the job?
Well, I'm going to jump in here because there's a question I include on every interview that I do. So if you're listening and applying for a job with me, pay attention. Um, it is how do you handle communicating with people whose values and goals are different from your own? And the answer is universals. You go back to the universals. So no matter what the leaning or the funding scenarios of our state are, Emily and I are both supporting people. And when we do chat, because we do, I think that's what we discover is that the challenges we're facing are more similar than they are different. And that people loving parks is really nonpartisan. How we support and manage them sometimes has a political leaning, but really it all comes back to understanding that our interpretive audiences expand beyond the people in front of us in a park. Our interpretive audiences are our colleagues, our leadership, people who aren't coming to parks, and going back to their universals and speaking to those first.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Rob. One of the real gifts that I was able to walk into was the idea that on a quarterly basis, people who are in these positions across the nation talk. And as I came in, obviously, given my previous role, I was really delighted because I knew about half of the other interpretive program managers because they had, integrated CIG and various, they were very involved with NAI. And that was a real gift for me coming in because like Rob said, we have more similarities than differences. And I think as I came in this is my first permanent job with government. So I worked seasonally with the National Park Service, but never permanent. And there was a lot of me first walking in going, wow, I mean, how do I do this? How do I handle the breadth of the system? How do I do this with resources that feel scant? And I am always, always inspired when I talk with this group of people. And I am always hearing from each other, you know, we're inspiring each other. We're presenting on different things. And there's this constant like, oh gosh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. And so I agree. I mean, sure, obviously, like, you know, if people could see us, my background is a desert scene. Rob's background is this like lush, deciduous forest. Like, obviously, geographically, there's quite a bit of difference. But that love for state parks, I think that love for the land, for the stories of our land, really does transcend. And I love the opportunities to learn about how these challenges are being addressed and get inspired from each other.
Yeah, and I would add also these problems we face are really cyclical. Sometimes because it's the first time we've experienced it, we
Yeah.
think it's novel to us. Right now, my state is in a very good position financially. I'm guessing someday within the rest of my 20 years I have in front of me in my career, we won't be as flush. And it'll be maybe the first time I experience, but then I'll have people to lean on to get information from. And then also, it won't be the first time I've had faced a challenge of working on organizational culture. And like Emily said, that state park interpretive leadership call has been so vital to be able to have this kind of moment where we can take off the kind of mask of having to be in control and calm and just say, this is my problem. How do I fix it?
I know you all through NAI. Emily, I did have the pleasure of working with you. We were both the only remote employees at NAI,
Right.
so we were zoomed out all the time.
Hmm.
And then Rob, just through, you know, national conference, I've been able to read your presentation submissions, work with you as a presenter. I believe last year, not in St. Augustine, but I think in Little Rock, you hosted a state park manager roundtable, which was
Yeah.
really nice, you know. So I love that this organization can also bring together people not only in your positions, but obviously interpreters at large. So how has your certification or your involvement in NAI helped you in your current role,
I
besides just
can,
being on your resume, Emily?
yeah, I'll start. I'll start. So as I mentioned earlier, obviously that was something that I leaned into. So prior to accepting this position, I literally called 3 people who are in this position, and said, what am I getting myself into? And, you know, what are the pluses, the minuses, you know, that kind of thing. So I always think when you can have those relationships, when you can, you know, kind of like what Rob said earlier, when you can take off the mask, or, you know, be able to say, okay, no, honestly, you know, like, tell me about how this is working. And so I think that NAI has always provided that community. It was really nice for me to be in St. Augustine and come back to the community, because it had been a couple of years since I'd been at the national conference. I also would say, you know, obviously I'm very biased in terms of certification and training. And so one of my negotiating factors, there were 3, but one of them, when I came to work for parks, was that I wanted to bring the certifications to state parks. And so we had not conducted certified interpretive guide before. We'd had a couple of people who had gone through the workshop to become CIGTs, but had not yet implemented it. And so doing so on an annual basis, and really it's been very interesting for me in my tenure working for NAI. Obviously, the people that I was training were interpreters. But now that we have gotten kind of through all the interpretive staff are certified, now we're certifying park ranger 1s, senior park aides, people of which interpretation is a component of their work. And so that's been really fun for me, and fun for them too. I mean, the biggest things that I have seen is I see the light bulbs come on for people. I see people saying, oh, I had no idea that interpretation was this much. And I find that I feel like I'm quoting Tilden, like, yes, interpretation is more than just information, kind of thing. So being able to share that process with people and that love and that practice is something that's been really delightful. We've also taken kind of a CIH light and integrated it into some other agency training. I was lucky enough to have the national process of interpretive planning in the last couple of years. So all my staff went through that, or not all, but many of the field staff. I, like Rob, do not have any field interpreters who report directly to me, but we were able to have 8 folks through the agency go through the interpretive planning workshop. And I think just the last thing is, seeing webinars and seeing things that are going out, because all of my field interpreters are members. And so, sometimes it's me nudging them and say, hey, did you see there's this new webinar on tribal engagement? Do we want to go to that and discuss? So I think it's always nice to be part of a community and just being able to bring that to this position or lean on it more. So it was already here, but to be able to leverage that a bit more.
Yeah, and you encapsulated so much of that so well, Emily. The only part I think that I would add from our perspective is it helped to level up the professionalism of what an interpreter does. I think it's very easy to think of like a professional certification for a plumber or an electrician or a medical professional. And I think by having this professional organization, it made people within my organization, when CIG was adopted about a decade ago, really open up their eyes and see it as a profession and worthy of respect. And that's where I keep coming back to recharge my batteries at NAI conferences, is to see that I'm not just standing on an island, or I'm not a Lorax on a stump screaming for the trees, that there are thousands of other Loraxes out there copyrighted. And we're all screaming for the trees and the history and getting people to pay attention in a positive way. And that's what I find incredibly valuable at NAI.
Well, Rob and Emily, obviously, like Song says, we could talk about this all day long. So nice to see both of you again. Before we get out of here, wanted to ask, where can folks find you all online, or the state parks organizations that you represent? Where can people find the work that you're doing?
So tnstateparks.org is a great launch pad to get to all of our social media. And then also go to your app store and check out Explore Tennessee State Parks. That is our AR/VR AI app, where you can do some really great user-generated conversations with closed-sourced artificial intelligence. Our latest one is Rebecca Ketcher, a descendant of the Trail of Tears. We actually partnered with the family and the 3 tribes of the Cherokee to create it. So check it out.
So cool. And so we at Washington State Parks are parks.wa.gov. And indeed, that's where you can find out the scope of all the different types of parks that we have and the different work that we're doing. And I am about a smidgen away from getting approval from Washington Tech to start going down the AR journey ourselves. So we've got one final step for approval, and I have interpreters chomping at the bit because they're so excited about creating these experiences. So hopefully we'll have an app you can download too within the next year or so.
About a smidgen. That is close. About a smidgen is awfully close.
We're so close. We're so close.
And interpreters?
That's
what's up.
What's up?